Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. We're extremely lucky to have Baroness Joan Walmsley back with us. I received a huge number of messages of appreciation after our last conversation, Joan, and so you are definitely back by popular request. And so thank you for squeezing this in. Just so everyone knows, this is our Quick Bites series. These are 30-minute webinars where we do a sort of snap analysis of something that's been going on in the news. And before we get into the content, would also urge you, if you want to keep following these conversations, to sign up to our newsletter and our podcast. So today's conversation is focused on the government's response to the House of Lords Committee report, which was focused on food, diet and obesity. And the report came out last year, and the government, I think in the end, took about 4 months to issue their response. 3 months, thank you, to issue their response. So, Joe, maybe you could just start by telling us really what happens next. Is this it?
Oh no, not at all, Anna. And thank you for inviting me to come back. I'm really pleased to do it, and it's great to have so many of your wonderful campaigners interested in pushing the government further than they really want to go. What happens next formally is that we get a debate in the House of Lords. I've got a date for that now. It's 2 months down the track. It's the 28th of March at 10 o'clock in the morning. It's a Friday. It's in the chamber of the House of Lords. The health minister will respond, and I will tell the government what I think of their response. And after that, there's nothing formal. But I can assure you that I shall carry on pushing on all these issues, and I'm quite sure many of my committee members, and I know all of you, will keep pushing, because actually we're going to have to do that, because look, this is the government's response, and this is what I think of it.
Right, okay, we're going to get into that. Just one brief clarification. You said that the health minister will speak. That's not Wes Streeting, right? That's the minister.
It's the one in the Lords. It's Gillian Merrin.
Yeah, okay, that's helpful. Great. Okay, so everybody knows what the government has to do is sort of essentially go one by one, isn't it, through your recommendations and provide a response to it. So tell us, if you can. Obviously, I know the overall response was very disappointing, but I'm determined to try and keep hold of the positives in today's conversation. So let's start by, what did you take away as the positive elements of it? And then maybe move on and tell us why you were just so disappointed.
Well, the only positive thing really was in the introduction, because they actually accept that we have an obesity crisis, that it's caused by increasingly unhealthy changes in our food environment. It includes the food products that are available to buy, their affordability, what they're made from, exposure to marketing and promotions, the time people have available to buy and prepare food, and whether we eat at home or out of the home. Actually, I'm sure most of you know that the rise of out of the home has really correlated with a tremendous increase in the levels of obesity. So they point out, as we did, that over 30 years, food and drink has become cheaper, more calorie dense, higher in saturated fat, salt and sugar. And that's, under the authority of successive governments. And as you also know, there have been over a dozen obesity strategies with hundreds and hundreds of policies in there. And the only one that's worked in any way at all, really, is the sugary drinks industry levy, which has managed to persuade manufacturers to reformulate and reduce the amount of sugar. Of course, what they have done instead is put non-sugary sweeteners in there, which may very well have problems of their own. So, so the government is quoting back at us some of the statistics that we gave them, like the 64% of adults in England living with an unhealthy weight. And they accept that there are serious challenges, both to our health, to the NHS, and of course to the economy. So it's rather encouraging that they're accepting all that. However, when you go into the detail, they say that they're committed to a mission-led approach, but they've got a number of missions. They've got the health mission, and they've got a mission to have the healthiest generation of children ever. We have a Secretary of State who claims to be in favour of primary ill health to save people and save the NHS. And we've also got a commitment to growth. And of course, there's growth. And the impression that I get, really, from this whole thing is that it's growth at any price, and they're just not courageous enough to grasp what needs to be done to the food industry, because I think if you heard the last webinar that we did, I pointed out that we based our recommendations on the things that had worked and the reverse of the things that hadn't worked. So over the years, the policies had been piecemeal, which is why we recommended a comprehensive overall strategy over the long term. They'd focused on voluntary measures rather than mandatory ones. And, well, we had a target of reducing percent, and what did we get? But 3%. So you can see how well that worked, which is why we've suggested that there should be mandatory targets for reducing sugar and salt, and a company should be fined if they don't reach them, and they will have to pay tax. And we can use that tax, as was supposed to happen to the sugary drinks tax, to make children's diets healthier. And then the final one was that most of the policies were based on personal choice in an environment where a lot of people don't have the freedom to choose good quality food because they can't afford it. It's not accessible on their estate, as some of your ambassadors showed in Parliament last week. And, they don't have the facilities to cook them or the skills or the time. So there's really, it's complex, and I accept that, and the government accepts it too. And they say it's very challenging, and there are certain technical barriers to doing some of the things that we're recommending. But I get the impression they've just put it on the too difficult pile. Yes, it's not easy. And yes, we have accepted in the report that a lot of work needs to be done on the Food Transparency Data Partnership, which would put together the metrics by which companies can report on the current healthy level of their portfolio of food. And then against that, we can see if they're improving over the years up against targets that the government should be setting. And they accept that that's what needs to happen. We accept it. That's what needs to happen. But what they haven't said is we're going to do the work in order to make it happen. And so, on ultra-processed food, we accepted that more research is needed. The government said more research is needed. And we said, in the meantime, perhaps the cautionary principle might be a good idea when it comes to the Eat Well Guide and the National nutritional advice. But no, they won't do that until SACN, the Scientific Advisory Committee on Nutrition, actually says they should. Now, fortunately, SACN is keeping a watching brief on this, and there is quite a lot of research going on, some of it funded by government. But many people feel that we have enough evidence already to give a warning to people that too high a percentage of ultra-processed food in their dietary pattern is going to lead to poor health and a shorter life and less contribution to the economy because sick people can't work. So there you are. The government wants growth. It wants the economy to thrive. But it's not willing to grasp the nettle of mandatory regulation of the food industry. All it's willing to do is no better than the last government did. In other words, the restrictions on advertising that were put into legislation in 2022 and is due to come into play in October this year. That's all they're going to do. They're not going to do any more than that. And things like the ban on placement of unhealthy foods near checkouts, well, that's already the law. It has been for nearly 2 years now, but it's not enforced. It's honoured in the breach rather than the doing it, because it's not being enforced. I mean, I'm quite sure you, the same as I, go into shops all the time and see the wrong sort of food in terribly attractive positions. Another thing that we recommended was that they look at free school meals and the Healthy Start voucher. It's not a voucher, it's a card. They say they always keep these things under review. They're going to review the sugary drinks in April, but they give no date for reviewing either the value or the eligibility or the auto-enrollment of school food or Healthy Start cards. There's no commitment to that at all. So, there's a whole lot more to it, but you might have some questions really, which, I can be more specific if you...
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I mean, I think we, like you, felt very disappointed, and it was the timing for us. We obviously launched our broken plate report on Wednesday, which, if you're listening and you've not yet taken a quick look at it, please do, because it's our flagship report, which really gives us a snapshot of what's going on in food environments and the extent to which they're actually enabling us to eat well. And it's a sobering story where we're seeing measures just getting stuck year after year. And this year in the report, we did the report in partnership with our citizens, because what they did, as you just referred to, Joan, is they took photographs, captioned photographs of their own experiences in their own neighbourhoods, of how they're experiencing their food environments. And they were very, very powerful. And some of the ambassadors spoke at our event in Parliament, and we had the minister there speaking, and as well as the chair of the Food Standards Agency, Susan Jebb. I think our ambassadors stole the show in terms of really providing such a powerful account of how these challenges really impact us as humans, and them particularly when you haven't got huge amounts of money to try and overcome some of these challenges. So I think we also felt a little bit demoralized in reading the response, but I also know that as a general rule, the government doesn't want to kind of make a whole set of new commitments in response to a report. They obviously want to be able to create their own moments for announcing new commitments. So there's a limit to sort of how much you can say, I suppose. But I was hoping for a clearer signal of a sort of level of ambition. And I think that's what really felt like it was missing, rather a sense that things are just going to be kind of kept under continual review. But I wanted to I want to pick up on your point about growth, and the sort of singular focus which the government has on that at the moment. And I suppose how you would articulate the challenge for organisations like ours and others, no doubt represented on today's webinar, about how we address this. I mean, I think we're obviously, I think, articulate about the extent to which diet-related ill health is a huge contributory factor to the number of people who are of working age and not able to work because they're not well.
Right.
That's very clear. But I think we're perhaps a bit less articulate about the externalities attached to certain types of growth, and the extent to which you might see growth in one area, but it's accruing cost and harm to the economy somewhere else. And I wonder also whether we could do better at talking about a more compelling vision for what a good food future looks like, and the role of the private sector in enabling that to happen through a kind of growth lens. And I'm interested in your thoughts on those arguments, really. And where should we be putting our energy?
Well, the food industry is not homogeneous, of course. It's not just the various sectors like the growers, the producers, the manufacturers, the retailers, the out of home, and the restaurants, the delivery people. But there are also a lot of very good food companies that are doing the right thing. And what they did say to us was, the difficulty with that is that it's so easy for them to be undercut by the bad guys who are not prepared to do the right thing, and then they lose market share. So what I have pointed out to the government is that if they have healthiness targets, then and they're mandatory right across the board, which is what the food industry witnesses told us they wanted. Then, of course, you get the right kind of growth. And the right kind of growth means that you're not spending so much on the costs to public services, such as particularly the NHS and the lack of productivity in the workplace. It so happens that when I was leaving your event on earlier in the week on Wednesday, I met again somebody who had sent us evidence about the desires and objectives of financiers who want to invest in healthier food companies. And she emphasized to me that unless there is a level playing field, they're just not going to do it. There's apparently a big conference going on in March just before our debate, and I did ask her to send me, anything interesting from that, because if I can say to the government, look, there's these many trillions of pounds available to invest in British good food companies, but they'll only do it if there's leadership from the government, if the government is doing the right thing, and you're not putting barriers in their way in the form of companies that are going to undercut them and totally ignore doing the right thing. So I think that is a big issue, really. You're not going to get growth if you don't get intellectual development amongst our children. And we know if they're not properly nourished, it doesn't just affect their physical health, it affects their mental health and their intellectual development as well. And that is our national asset. And, we're not going to get anywhere in the world if we waste our national assets. And I'm not just talking about the wind round the coast, I'm talking about the young people. I must say, I was so impressed by the young people who came to talk to us, because they know that they're influenced by this deluge of advertising of the wrong kind of food, and they want to be protected from it, and they know what the right kind of food is, but they can't afford it, they can't access it, they can't cook it, and all those things that we've said. This is, for a Labour government, this food is an equalities issue. And I tried, in talking to ministers, to really emphasise how doing something bold about the food environment lines up with their political principles and also the things in their manifesto, the growth, the primary prevention, the healthiest generation of children. And I did say to them, nobody's going to criticise you if you do things which are going to make our children healthy and give them healthier food. I think they're still afraid of these two dreaded words, nanny state.
Yes, I really like your idea around the investors. We actually, so I think I know who you spoke to at the event, and she's part of the
Yeah,
coalition of investors that we convene who are working on UK food policy.
yeah.
And they've been, quite a strong voice to make the
Mm,
case for the
that's
material
right.
risks baked into the system and the extent to which they are a threat to growth already.
Indeed.
But I think your angle's really interesting around the extent to which it could actually attract
Yeah,
higher levels of investment if the
absolutely.
parameters are set right.
Yeah,
And obviously, the Food Data Transparency Partnership being the key building
it
block for
is.
that to
It's
happen.
fundamental. Yeah.
Exactly. And
But
I
all they're
think that,
saying is it's very difficult. Well, yes, it's not easy, I accept that. But there are a lot of clever people who can put their heads together and do it. But it's got to have some determination and leadership from the top.
yeah, yeah, 100% agree. Um, let's move on to talk about so the two key kind of processes which are highlighted in the government response, which were really sort of lots of things were sort of passed to these processes, were the health mission, which
Mm,
you've mentioned, and the food strategy, which
mm.
DEFRA has announced is it's starting to work on. I'm interested to hear your thoughts really on to what extent do you see these as opportunities? Do you think we should be pushing on both at once? Where do you see their relative strengths as processes to this agenda? And how are you going to be trying to influence both of those processes?
Yes, well, we have to push them all at once, I think, and also the Child Poverty Task Force.
Yeah.
And that's very important as well. So as far as the DEFRA food strategy is concerned, when I was talking to Steve Reed about our report, he actually invited me to get involved with it. And I said I'd be delighted as long as it's a healthy food strategy. And I noticed that one of the four pillars that they've come up with is healthy food, as well as food security and sustainability and all the rest of it. However, I was a bit cynical when he made that invitation, and I was right because I haven't had a formal invitation to get involved in any way yet. However, it is early days, and although they've issued these four pillars, they haven't got a clear remit, although they are saying we want to work in partnership with the food industry. Well, um, as you know, our report said government decides on policy, food industry gets involved in implementation and then compliance with what the government says. So that's the food strategy. It's vitally important, actually, I think, the food strategy, because our farming industry has many complexities, and we're now getting a land use strategy, which is really good, and it shows actually that really the good quality agricultural land only needs to produce about 1 or 2% more food for us to be able to use the poorer land for biodiversity conservation
Mhm.
and all the rest of it. So it's very doable, and I do think farmers must get very frustrated because when food leaves the farm gate, it's healthy. And I really give credit to those organisations that scoop up that food and redistribute it. And that's
Mhm.
happening. And I know DEFRA has actually given a grant to enable more of that to happen, which is good. But I think the food strategy is vitally important, but they really have to be firm with the food industry. And I was very worried when I read in the government's response that they don't want to do anything that adds cost to industry. Well, these are very profitable industries, and they have a responsibility and a public duty, I think, as well as to make profit for their shareholders. And I have never criticised that. But, you know, the public duty is something that I think we can all shout about. And I love it when I see your food ambassadors shouting for more food, better food for particularly for people on low incomes. It's so very important. Now, the health mission, of course, well, I'm often asked about the weight loss jobs. And my view on that is that there is a place for them, for those people who are already living with obesity, and it can improve their lives tremendously and their longevity. And so there is a place for those, but they are very expensive. And in fact, if everybody who is entitled to them actually got it on the NHS, and of course they don't at the moment, it would pretty well bankrupt the NHS. And it's much, much cheaper to incentivize healthy food in the first place to stop people needing those jabs. I was very encouraged when the government first came in and started talking about prevention, and Lord Darcy talked about prevention. Wes Streeting talks about prevention, but the only thing they've done about obesity is treatment. It's not prevention, it's treatment. So although, as I say, there's a place for it, we can make a much better dent on the problem if we can stop it in the first place. And that's not just helping kids to run around a bit more. As Lord McCall from the Conservative benches always says, it's what you put in your mouth. That's what he says, and he's quite right. So we really have to address these energy-dense, highly palatable foods that are high in fat, salt and sugar, saturated fat, salt and sugar, because there are healthy fats. But the government will not do anything, you know, in a mandatory way. They're just talking about balancing the mandatory and the voluntary, and we don't want to stifle innovation. And
yeah, I mean, I think we should leave people with the sort of determination and hope that the government will move on this agenda through these two processes, the health mission and the food strategy. And I think we need, the onus is on all of us to really engage with those processes and make a case, building on your report and the evidence that you've so helpfully compiled in it, to make that case. So I don't think, I want to leave people thinking, well, there's still a lot to be done here,
and there's such a lot to do,
and there's a lot of processes which are open for these conversations to rise up the agenda. And I think the onus is on all of us to try and create that space and allow that to happen and fuel those conversations with the evidence that's needed.
Yes, they have left the door open for a lot of things. I think the Child Poverty Action Task Force, they call themselves, don't they? I think they could be very, very influential. And I have asked if I can go and see them. I just had a standard message back on the email saying, if you've got anything to say, click here. So I thought that's not good enough. I want to go and see them. So I shall keep trying.
And we're getting quite engaged in that process as well. And as you say, we're expecting them to report before the spending review. So it's on a relatively short-ish time frame. We've reached the end of our time. Joan, thank you for sharing your thoughts. I know it's probably feeling a little bit, it's difficult news at the end of a busy week, but I think next week's another week, and we'll continue to make a case for following up on your recommendations in the report. And I remain very hopeful that both the health mission and the food strategy will progress this agenda in a more ambitious way than perhaps has been articulated in the response. But the onus is on all of us to make that happen. So thank you, Joan, for all your leadership.
I drink that.
And we'll be in touch. Thank you, everybody, for joining and for listening in. Please do let us have any feedback or share the recording with colleagues if you think they'll find it useful. And don't forget the newsletter and podcast. Have a lovely weekend, everybody. And thank you again, Joan.
Bye-bye.
Bye.